Welcome to the BOOMCLAP podcast, where culture and conviction collide. I'm Rita Rogers.
And I'm Cecily Dickey.
All right, today we have Willie Robertson on with us. We're so excited for this conversation and for you guys to hear it. If you guys don't know who Willie is, I'm going to read you a little bit about him, but I'm guessing most of you will just be familiar like we are from the show Duck Dynasty. So Willie Robertson is the CEO of Duck Commander and Buck Commander and star of A&E's Duck Dynasty, which Cecily and I both talked about in the show that we very much enjoyed, or in the podcast, in our show, right? Robertson has expanded his family companies from a living room operation to a multi-million-dollar enterprise and destination for all things outdoors. Duck Commander is the best-selling duck call brand in the U.S. He is also a New York Times best-selling author of the book Duck Commander Family, How Faith, Family, and Ducks Build a Dynasty, American Hunter, American Fisherman, and American Entrepreneur. He also wrote a book, Gospeller, which we're going to talk about. Much of what we talk about, I guess, today is about that book and sharing faith.
Okay, so just before coming on to record this intro, Rita and I were looking up that bio and we were like, that's a crazy bio. Not very many people have a bio that's like that, right? But the really unique thing about Willie is that it's not like, oh, he's a businessman here and an outdoorsman here and a family man here and a man of faith over there. He's all of these things all of the time, and he 100% owns it, and it's 100% integrated, which is so unique. And I wish it wasn't as unique as it is. And that's what makes, I guess, him and his family feel so special to all of us, is that he owns the man that God created him to be. And what an amazing thing that is. And that's just a taste of some of the stuff that we're going to get into in this episode. Is just that living out your faith authentically, whether it's in business, family, anything, and just how to share your faith, how to evangelize. That's something that's been lost. Rita actually says in this interview with Willie that we've become a people that just looks to the expert class to accomplish things for us. But that's actually not how it should be, especially when we're talking about the Great Commission. So absolutely love this conversation with Willie, and I think you guys are going to love it too.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of being authentic, I know we've talked in a Q&A we did in the past. Somebody had asked us about our guests and what it's like interviewing some of these people. And I will say, Willie was extremely authentic. He was exactly as I expected. Cecily and I mentioned before getting on, like, we weren't nervous for this episode at all because it just felt like we were going to be talking to a friend, and that's what it felt like. So that was so appreciated. But anyway, great episode. Before we get into that, I want to remind you, please go leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen, and also be reminded about our other great episodes coming out this month. We have an episode about whether or not you should vote. We obviously think you should vote, but we're going to have a discussion about some of the things that people say and reasons around why they may think you shouldn't vote, and kind of debunking those. We also talked to a favorite, I think our most downloaded episode ever, Just the Inserts. We talked to her again. She has a new book out. It's going to be a great episode. And then Heidi Kleisig, we talked to her about brain death and organ donation and organ harvesting. This is a conversation I think many people haven't even considered. I read the book, and let me tell you, you need to think about this. Something we need to all be thinking about. So
absolutely. So Rita, I just got to tell this story. Rita had sent me a reel on Instagram about brain death and, well, this conversation that we're going to have with Heidi. So I won't go too much into it. And you hadn't really said anything in it except you sent me the reel. So I'm watching the reel. I'm like, whoa, this is super interesting. And then I wrote back to Rita. I'm like, are you sending this to me because you have concerns about my brain? Because it would be fair. I have concerns about my brain sometimes. I'm very forgetful in some ways. Rita was very kind and said that it's because I know what to prioritize in my mind, and we'll go with that. But I'm just super intrigued about this. So I don't know. Everyone's going to love it. I think on your Instagram too, people seem really engaged in that conversation. So really looking forward to that.
For sure. I know so many of us are looking for ways to keep our families healthy while avoiding the doctor's office. And one of the ways that Cecily and I have both found to do this is homeopathy. We have both benefited from homeopathy, and specifically RMDY Collective. They have been one of the ways that we have learned to care for our family. It's helped us not only with their remedies, but also the learning process. We each have their first aid kit, and in that first aid kit comes a guide with a list of problems that describes what remedy to use for what problem. It's been so helpful to have on hand. So if you guys are interested in learning more about homeopathy, but also having remedies to keep on hand for you and your family, go to RMDYcollective.com/BOOMCLAP podcast and use the code BOOMCLAP to save 10% on your order. Hi, Willie. We are so happy to have you with us today. You're a man who I think needs no introduction. I feel like everybody's going to know who you are. But there might be that rare listener who doesn't know who Willie Robertson is. So we appreciate you coming on with us first and foremost. But would you maybe just give a little bit of background, at least, for the listener who might not have heard your story before?
Well, my name is Willie Robertson. I live in West Monroe, Louisiana. I probably am best known for a television show called Duck Dynasty.
Mm-hmm. Which I loved. I think I've watched it all. I mean, it's been a while. We don't actually have TV anymore or anything, so I don't know if there's reruns or whatever, but I feel like we've watched it. Almost all of it. So
you said show. I love it, and then you said I think. I thought you were going to say I think I loved it. I'm not sure.
No, it was so good. I
definitely loved it. Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, my husband and I do have regular TV. We don't have streaming where we live because we're kind of in the boonies and the internet's not fast enough for that. But I was thinking how we look at night for something on TV and there's nothing good, quote unquote, on anymore. And as I was preparing for this episode, I'm like, oh man, I really miss those Duck Dynasty days. The world felt different and everything. So anyway.
It really did. It was, at the time, it's been 12 years now since it first came out, 2012. This year I was speaking somewhere, maybe South Carolina, and they got me a house. And so I walk in the house. It was like a Airbnb or somebody owned the house, and they said, you can stay here. And I walk in and I can hear my voice, and I'm like, what is going on? And then I hear like Uncle Si's voice, and then and they thought it was so funny. Apparently there's a channel that just has Duck Dynasty on it.
Wow, really?
And so they left it on when I came in, and so they left it on. And I sat there, and I came in like at 11 o'clock at night. It's 2 a.m, and I've got caught up in the Duck Dynasty vortex of watching this show, and I'm laughing, and I said what I realized was it's a really good show. I forgot how good it was. It's really funny. So and for you, I haven't watched them all. There's still some that I haven't actually never watched. Yeah.
Is it really hard watching yourself on TV?
It is. It's not my favorite thing to do. We would, we would have watch parties because the nature of the show was, so there were usually 2 stories. So it was like what we call an A story and a B story. And so I was almost always in one of those stories. Well, the other side, I didn't know what happened. I may have heard about it through production, like at the time. But so when I watched it, it was the first time I watched it as well when it came out on television. And I would watch the other side. Obviously, I knew the parts I was in, but I would watch and laugh just like everyone else. I get so tickled at some of the stuff that they would do.
That's awesome. Yeah. There was just something so different about it, I guess, and that's what made it part of what made it such a success. There's just not other stuff like that out there. So, I mean, like Rita said, the world felt different. And I'm always kind of skeptical about my own memory. I'm like, was the world different, or was I just super naive about the world at that point in my life? It would have been like my early 20s, which is totally possible. But it just felt like more like when I was a kid, and like as a family, we would gather around the TV, like after dinner or something, and just like watch a show together. Like that's the kind of show that it felt like, not like the kind of stuff that you get nowadays.
Yeah, I think, I think it was different. I mean, I think the world was much different in 2012. Yeah. But it was the beginning, I feel like, of some of the big changes that have happened, just in the last 12 years. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff that has happened, and so I think it was different, and there was a time, and I think it's almost hard for people to even, I don't know, it's so stressful now, it's hard to even have those moments or enjoy that, because it feels like Well, you're almost judged if you're not stressed out, then you don't care enough, you don't care enough about the world or the world that we're in, you have to pick a side and make a stand and do something.
That's actually, let's talk about that first, because I read your book, Gospeller. I had to listen to you say that word because when I first saw it, I was like, Gospeller, cool. But yeah, you say Gospeller, and apparently it's like an actual word and everything. And in there was a chapter called Hope Yeller, which I think really applies to this conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel this acutely, on our podcast, we talk about all sorts of different things, but oftentimes we're talking about cultural things that are happening because our tagline, I guess, if you will, is the BOOMCLAP podcast where culture meets conviction. So talking about culture and then hopefully trying to look at it through a biblical worldview, through our values, and encouraging people to live strong within the culture and examine it closely. And by nature, obviously, we're going to talk about some really hard things that people would call political, that definitely have become political, but maybe started moral. And it's hard to find that middle ground of not sinking into because even though Rita and I both are very hopeful people, very optimistic, not so much about the state of the world, but about the God that we serve, to other people, sometimes maybe it can sound like we're just talking about these really negative things all of the time. So I don't know, you did such a good job in that chapter talking about how to be a hope yeller. And I'm wondering if there's also some really practical advice for how people can engage in culture without becoming just everything's terrible, What would you think?
It's depressing sometimes. It is. And so, which if you can avoid that, then you really can stand out because people look at you going, what makes you so happy? What's coming out? Where's that coming from? Which can create a conversation, which is kind of why I wrote the book. Because what I found was that, so especially with Christianity, there's just such a negative spirit coming out. And I don't think that was the way it's supposed to be. I mean, if we think now is hard, if you read the New Testament, which is a couple thousand years ago, but drastically worse, where I think everybody we're reading about was killed or, because of their faith. So these are horrible times. And so how did they find any joy? As bad as things are now, I don't know that I haven't heard of people, at least in America or parts of Canada, being drug out of their homes, so I think what I find is people will get online or they'll get in their buildings and they'll really just spew out we want to tell you how bad it is. And we just heard this and we read this online and this was a movie or this was a song or this was a television show. And so what it is, it's just negative. And the point I make is I don't think as Christians, our task was never given in the Bible, which was go tell everybody how bad everything is. I can see that and feel that for myself. So there's no sense in me being another person going, I'm going to tell you how bad it is. But yet I find a lot of believers do that. And they're consumed with all their time doing that. There's very little talk of hope. The gospel is also translated as good news. So it's sometimes rare when you hear somebody talking about good news. It's usually what the bad news is. And so I just wanted a kind of a call back to, we should be yelling hope. We should be giving good news, not just the bad news. I understand that, tragic things are happening all over, but so the answer is, so what? I think I have a little thing I would teach, and I would say, so, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Okay, perhaps that's true. What are we going to do about it? Are we just going to tell everyone how bad it is, or are we going to do something good? And so the tagline in Gospeller is turning darkness to light, one conversation at a time. And so most of what I found in the New Testament is, especially when people were being converted and changed over from something bad to something good, or dark to light, or dead to life, or dark to light, however you want to, there's many ways that it's described in there. Most of it is small it's conversational between just a few people. So it's not this gigantic thing. I think in Acts chapter 2, that was a big gathering of people, but all throughout the book of Acts, it's just small, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, it's just small groups of people. So I think we can really change that, and not having to do it in stadiums. We certainly know that the message of the Bible has carried forth and worked, because we're still talking about it 2,000 years later. Like, it impacts my life every day. It impacts my marriage and my children. It impacted the television show. So what happened there worked, and it was men and women who were positive in terrible circumstances, having conversations with people around them. They didn't have money. They didn't have marketing. They didn't have budgets. They didn't have any of the things that we have today, even to get around the world. It wasn't happening. They weren't military people. They weren't political people. They were just spreading this good news and positive vibes amongst people. So I think we can all change that. Kind of like when they say politics, all politics is what? It's local, right? So as it gets down, especially in America, it comes down to small towns, or it comes down to even states, So, right now in this time, where there's an election coming up, it's all down to a few states, which is going to be a few counties, a few, it always gets smaller as to what's going to happen in the bigness of it. And so, and I think we can. I think we can. I think Duck Dynasty was a way, one, to take out the politics, and it wasn't even religious. It wasn't a religious show at all, but you saw the fruits of that coming out. You saw love and joy, peace, patience, kindness. You see these, fruits of the Spirit perhaps coming out of our lives with each other. And also just a joyous look at each other, not taking ourselves too seriously, not getting caught up and being able to laugh at ourselves, having fun. And, where it was a funny show, but also had some heart, ended in a prayer. And, I don't think people would have thought that would have worked before, because reality TV typically was fighting, cursing, nudity. These were the ideas when you think about reality TV. Yeah. And so we had this concept like, well, where's, who's going to be fighting and who's going to be trying to take over? So I was like, that's not going to happen here. And we're like, the network's like, I'm not sure if this is going to work. And not only did it work, it went on to be the most watched unscripted show in the history of cable television. I don't think it'll be beaten because of streamers now.
Right.
And it's probably one of the last, speaking of times have changed, it was one of the few where it was one of the last shows where a lot of people watched it at the same time. That doesn't happen anymore. People watch stuff now on their own time. So that was one of those Wednesday night, we're all gathered around the TV.
Yeah.
And you had seen that over the past several decades where people would watch. Now outside of, live sports and, other things, people don't watch at the same time. They watch, on their own schedules and all that. So it did work. And what it proved to me was you don't have to act like the world. You don't have to spew out all the stuff to be successful in the world. You can certainly stand out by being positive and happy and coming from more of those godly principles. I mean, if nothing else, we're proof of that. Yeah.
So something that you mentioned in that was that, politically things start small, county, state, whatever. I'm not American, so I really screw up sometimes when I'm talking about how things work there. But yeah, like you said, that's true of the gospel as well. Like in Acts, that's what it was. And there's probably a way better way to describe this, but I'm thinking of like a backwards funnel, so instead of spinning down, it's kind of like spinning up and kind of getting bigger instead of smaller. Because even just when you think of the family, right? When I think of what my husband and I are trying to accomplish in our family is to raise kids who then can go out and multiply what we've been teaching them, and spread that. And like everything grows from there. The thing is, though, a lot of people just they might see the value in like evangelism, but they aren't willing to do it, right? Like, I think that's another thing that just makes your family from the outside looking in really unique is that evangelism and like baptizing people, that was just commonplace for you. It sounds like in your younger years, like this is just something that just happened all the time. You saw people coming into your home, getting the gospel preached to them, getting baptized. And that's amazing. But it's I think, and I don't know if this is again, a Canadian thing or not, but extremely unusual. Like Canada is even more post-Christian than you guys are. So I'm like, it's very unusual. So why aren't people evangelizing? Because I can say for myself, it's easy in a way. There's a lot of things that are difficult about it, but it's easy to get on the podcast and tell people about God. And it's easy. I'm a worship leader. That's the other thing I do. It's easy to get up on the stage and tell people about God from there. But it's a lot harder to speak to family and friends about God. So why is that? I mean, I'm sure there's so many reasons, but what's your encouragement to people that just find that it's just so difficult?
Yeah, that's why I wrote the book, was to try to help people. And I think in a book form, even better than a podcast. A lot of times podcasts, you're coming off the top of your head. In a book, you can actually, everything is thought through, and this has to make sense with this chapter and this chapter. That's why I like podcasts as well, but books are really, I feel like for the most part, people pour in and they have a point they're trying to make. And I really broke this down to where I could try to answer that question as to why I think I like your funnel example, because I think the funnel started. I think God came down from the top here, and now we see that, as you were saying, a reverse going back up. Why is evangelism hard? I think it's okay. This could probably be an entire podcast just on that one question, but I feel like one is, the premise of the book where I pretty much come out of is Matthew 28, what we probably most people know as the Great Commission. And so out of the commission, I want to break that down and say, like, this is our mission. Jesus says that's 3 things. Now, this is the last thing he said before he leaves. So it's got to be important. It's got to be, this is Jesus saying it. So he says, make disciples of all nations. That is not inward, that is outward. He says, baptize people. He mentions baptism. That is not inward, that's outward. And he says, teach people everything I've told you, which is not inward, it's outward. So what I feel like a lot of Christians today, everything has become inward. I go to church because it helps me get through the week, and I read the Bible, and I have my quiet time, and I have my prayer time to get me and my kids, so a lot of it is focused inward. So if your mission is wrong, so if those 3 things, because I know a lot of people who live a Christian life, they're nowhere near those 3 things. They're not making disciples. They're not baptizing people, not teaching people. So then you say, well, what is the mission? Here's what I hear from a lot of people. I need to try to go to church as much as I can and be a good person. In and of itself, there's nothing wrong with those things. That's not a mission. That's not, or it's such a watered down mission. It's not really a mission. And so a lot of people find themselves, again, it's back to an inward thought, not an outward thought. When Jesus went to Zacchaeus' house, which was a bold move, and then he says, and Zacchaeus is repenting, and he says, this is why I came, to seek and save what was lost. He said, this is the reason I'm even here. So it wasn't for Jesus. I came for other people. So the first thing you got to do is you have to think of an outward idea. So even in churches, I think people may argue, say, Willie, nobody ever told me that was part of the deal, that I had to go tell someone else. And I try to make the case in the book. What if it's the whole deal? Like once you get something, that's great. Now, how are you going to share it with others and help others? The first chapter of the book is directly why I wrote that. There was a man who went to a bar in a adversarial way and shared the gospel with my father. Had that not happened, my parents' marriage would not have stayed together. They were already split up. I would have grown up in a completely different situation with probably never knowing my father. There wouldn't have been a Duck Commander, which means there would have been a TV show. I can backtrack that story all the way to hundreds of millions of people all over the globe through the TV show, the prayer at the end, the movies we've made, the podcasts we've done, all the stuff Sadie does all over the world, all the books, all this stuff, I can trace it back to a young couple, speaking of back down to local. One couple, South Arkansas, owned a bar, no money, 3 little boys at the time. And that one thing was the only last hope that they had. One, to save their marriage, keep the family together. And by the way, if that's the only thing that had happened, it would have meant a lot to me. It wouldn't have maybe meant stuff to you guys. We probably would never have known each other. So it affects even the moment with me talking to you right now, with people listening from your audience. I can still trace it back going, that one conversation. It was just one conversation that a guy had. And my father didn't even respond. Like, he just said, I'll keep that in mind. It wasn't until later, whenever his life was, when he was going to go to jail and his life was in such a mess, that he came back and said, that guy told me some story about something that, dead people could live again, and some about repenting and changing. And so my father obeys the gospel. My mother forgives him. They keep the marriage together. So looking back over the last 50 years, I'm like, that's how close it was to my whole life being different. And then what happened was they started living on the mission that looked more like the New Testament, less like perhaps American churches or perhaps where you're at in Canada, which is less of a consumer, just show up. Hey, I'll give it an hour a week, and the rest of my life I live like I want to live it. So I think mission is important. I think you have to be unselfish. I think you have to care about people. You got to have conversations, you got to care about people. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I see in the world now, and perhaps even in churches, is if you really look at how we're treating each other, we really just don't care about each other. We care about us. We care about our people and our perhaps people in our deal, but we just don't care about people. And I think the internet and, the more we find out about people, I think the less we care about people, because now we're like, I know I don't like those people. Now I can't stand what they think or how they are politically, or those Canadians, they're crazy. So it's like, and then we just get more and more tribal. It gets smaller and smaller to where it's like, I'm only going to hang out with people that believe just what I want to believe and how I believe it. And so I think it starts about caring about people. And then once we get from there, then we've got to look for those conversations that can actually, we look for change, like we're trying to help people out and maybe make some changes in their life. And I think ultimately we got to be courageous. We got to take the courage to actually open our mouths. Those three things, you're not going to make a disciple. You're not going to baptize someone or teach someone if you don't open your mouth. So you're going to have to talk to people about their lives. And so, and it's difficult, but I think there's a lot of reasons we don't like, and those are arguments I try to make in my book, which is we disqualify ourselves for a lot of reasons. Typically the number one thing is I don't know the Bible well enough. So, how can I tell anyone something if I don't know the Bible well enough? Or I'm not shy. Perhaps if they're religious, they'll say, well, it's not my gift. That sounds good. My gift is something else. And so we have all these things. I don't know where to start. That's one. I don't know how to start a conversation. I don't want it to be awkward. Or maybe it's even what I think is it's kind of a trick of the evil one, perhaps, is to say, you should just keep that to yourself. That's your personal, and I kind of make that deal in the book where personal. If you told me that's my personal, right? Like if you guys asked me something, I said, hey guys, that's personal. Well, y'all would probably go like, okay, don't ask about that. But yet we actually describe our relationship with Jesus as a personal relationship. So if you say it's personal, it's like, I guess that's just for you. And so all these reasons, and what I try to do in the book is break down all of those, saying, no, this is how we get past all these ideas. If it's not known the Bible, well, what are we doing? Could we study? And generally I have about 7 passages that I usually read through with people and see if it can make their difference. And I have a lot of stories in the book that actually are conversations that I had with people, where they started, where they ended. Sometimes even when it doesn't, when we think, well, that didn't work. Remember, my father didn't come around until about a year later. So the Bible will call it like planting seeds, and you wait, right? And you wait and see what's going to come up and how that's going to be affected. So hopefully that's the roundabout way of trying to answer your question.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that explanation. One word that you said in there was adversarial. So the guy who came to your dad, it was almost in an adversarial way.
Well, when I said adversarial, I think my father was adversarial. The preacher wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't necessarily adversarial.
Adversarial. That's really interesting. But he was bold, right?
Like bold. He walked into a bar, which is typically not where you'd have a Bible study, and actually was, wanting to share with this guy in his environment, because I think we always were like, well, maybe they'll come to church with us and they'll sit there and they'll listen and maybe they'll understand, about what they hear. But that's not always the case. My father wasn't a guy who was going to walk into a church building ever, because he had no reason to walk in there, because he didn't understand why there was a church building in the first place. He didn't understand any of this. And so if you were going to get him, you were going to have to go to where he was. And that just happened to be, at the time, a bar. And so, that's why I say it was adversarial in that. But the guy took the courage, and so I think about him often, just think, wow, what if he would have just said no? It wasn't even in the same state. Like, he crossed state lines. This wasn't a guy he thought would come to his church. Like, it wasn't a guy who had money, who was like, oh, he could help me out. There was nobody who was famous. I mean, this was a really just a reprobate who was, and his sister, my dad's sister, my aunt, she was the one who begged the guy, please, because she knew. She was like, and she actually said, if you convert Phil Robertson, he'll convert 1,000.
Wow.
How did she know that? Like, there was nothing leaning in any way towards that, what was going to happen. And so, so I was able to see that model throughout my childhood. And now that there's a changed life, changed marriage. So I saw him really go after people, and because he was like, I've been there, I know what that's like. And so then he just had this just appetite for just sharing with anybody all the time. And so I saw this Monday through Sunday, every week, all the time. And so it really impressed on me, is to get that message out. But there are ways, I mean, like, you guys doing a podcast, there's other ways that help too. I think our television show did that. No, it didn't at the time. I didn't seem like I was preaching to anyone, but man, so many people are like, thank you. That really helped me, or that helped. The prayer was one thing, but even on a simpler version, people don't sit down and eat together anymore. I mean, it was such a foreign concept. It was like, we never eat. We're always, we're picking up this on the way. And so what happens is you're not having this time. You're not having conversations. You're not having that. So even some of those simple ideas that aren't even necessarily quote unquote Christian, but really keep a family together, really understand where you're at. Now, people are just on their phones and they're just no time, even when you're together, you're not together. And that's parents and kids. That's not, parents are the same way. And so I think all those things were helpful. I think it was a bright light. It also showed in Hollywood and that things can be successful. They don't have to be so bad, Again, back to, we can yell about what's wrong, or we can try to do something about it. And we got given that opportunity to actually make TV. We had people warn us, like, if you do this, it's going to tear your family apart. You see how people turn out. But I was like, if not us, then who? Who's going to make quality television? Who's going to, if we're just going to give it all to the world and say, y'all make it and tell us what should entertain us and tell us what that should be, then I know what we'll get, And so, so again, it was that bright light, I felt like at the time, in a dark space. But there's, even since then, there's been other positive things that come out that have been able to influence a lot of people in many different ways. And I feel like it's just a different way of sharing the gospel. Like the story I'm telling about my father, we made that into a movie last year called The Blind, did really well. People have seen it all over the world now. It's actually on the airplane. So that's awesome. Funny. I'll be sitting by someone watching the movie about my parents.
Looking at you like, maybe it's the guy.
Yeah, they don't even realize that.
Crazy.
I'm like, it's a little 2-year-old. That's me on the movie that's being portrayed. But that's just another way to get it out. So like the methods can change. The message always stays the same, but the methods can certainly change. So any way that we can get the message out is positive. So, I think it is conversations. It can be. It's not always just strangers either. I mean, these are people that and you're friends with, family, spouses, kids. I mean, a lot of times they never heard it and they don't know. So,
yeah. Well, I think much of it. Oh, go ahead, Rita.
One thing you said was your dad wasn't somebody who was just going to go to church. And I think that that's one of the encouragements always within the church is bring somebody to church with you. And rarely are we told, go tell somebody about Jesus, which is different, right? And I think maybe one of the reasons that we struggle with this in America, I thought of this just a little bit ago, is we really love the expert class. Like we rely on experts for everything, for our health, for our faith, And so I think sometimes people just think, well, the pastor's the expert. So if I'm going to share Jesus with someone, I better bring them to church with me so the pastor can tell them. And I don't know, like you said, consumers, like people become consumers then. And so they go to church, they're the consumer, and they bring their friend to be a consumer. And then that's where discipleship kind of falls flat.
Yeah. Is that the best way to do it? Probably not. Even from a practical, I think sometimes we can use our brains and say, is that the best way? So if you've got, like I'm a business guy, so if I want to get the word out about my product, if I go to a town and I've got a building and that has 1,000 people in it, let's call it a church, would you rather have the one guy on the stage talking about it or the 1,000 to go out and talk about it? I would take the 1,000 every day. Like that's why I want talking about my product. Not that there's anything wrong with the guy talking, and you can have both. But generally, typically that's what happens. It's that one. And so if you take the 1,000 people and they're all going to have to reach out to the one person to share to that person, again, just think about how long that would take to have that. So we're empowered, we're equipped. I can teach people. I guess you become an expert. Well, they say do it 10,000 hours and you become an expert. So if you do it long enough, you'll become an expert. I can teach people how to cook. I can teach people, how to hunt and fish. And, I know these things because I've done them a lot. And so sharing my faith is the same way. There's so much experience. And usually I tell people, just jump in. If all you can say at the beginning, kind of like, remember the blind guy in the New Testament, where they come and go like, who healed you? And he goes, I had no idea. All I know is this. I was blind. Now I can see. Says his name was Jesus. That's all I got. Yeah. And so if that's all you got, that's all you got. That's a good starting point. But as you do it more, as you study the word more, which when I study the word, it's so that I can use it out there. Again, it's not an inward focus. It's like, this could help out, because it happens all the time. Someone asks me a question. I'm like, I have no clue. Let me go find out the answer. And I think we can ask better questions. So you brought up the church thing, which is interesting. So there's a question we ask people like, do you go to church? And so I don't know really what we want the answer to be. And so if the answer is yes, then generally that conversation ends right there. Like, oh, great. And so we don't ask them another question because we just assume they said yes to that. I've asked people before, and guess where they tell me they go? The same place that I go. I've never seen them, And then if you dig in further, it's like, I hadn't really been in several years, but yet you thought because they answered that, or we get the answers no, and then we're like, great, I can invite you. And then we hope, again, with our fingers crossed, going, I hope that they see this. I always say it like this. Like, let's say a guy, my insurance salesman goes, you have got to come to our insurance convention. It's unbelievable. And I'm like, okay, I'll go. And they're talking about, I go, and they're all happy and they're jumping around. They're talking about their bonuses and they're talking about rates and premiums. I have no idea what they're talking about. Like I'm sitting there, I'm watching them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to come out of there knowing what it means to be a good insurance salesman. And I think sometimes people may come into our groups and, by the way, we speak a whole different language, like the stuff we do, the redemptive work of the Spirit. I'm sure people are going, what are they talking about? They may can see joy and see something there, but a lot of times it's that conversation that happens. So as you read the New Testament, you'll see some great questions. Like in Acts chapter 8, there's an Ethiopian. He's going back to Ethiopia, and this guy Philip comes up to him. He was led by the Spirit. So the guy had just been worshiping in Jerusalem. Now he's reading the book of Isaiah, which is a book in the Old Testament. So if I would have pulled up beside him, and I'll put it in modern day terms, he just went to church and now he's reading his Bible at the stoplight, and I'm going to look at him and go like, hey, brother, like this, we're on the same team. But Philip asking this question, do you understand what you're reading? And he says, how can I unless someone explains it to me? And then he said he took that very passage right there and explained to him, all it says is the good news of Jesus. So there he was doing what looked like the right thing. He was reading the book of the Bible. He had no idea. And so how many people are probably doing the same thing? They have no idea. They bounced into a group of believers, a church, and they're sitting there. They have no clue about Jesus. And so we need to be the ones, or at least I want to be the one to be able to explain that to them and in the best way that I can. The Bible says, always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have. And so if we have hope, I want to be able to explain that and to people. And whatever that takes, and I think it's being the heart of a teacher, and saying, man, let me teach you how to do this. Much like my kids, like I want to teach them, like, let me teach you how to do this, because this is going to really help you in life. And so, again, that comes back to caring about people, right? If I don't care about people, I don't care, like I don't want to get involved in your life. My life is good. And if your life is terrible, it's probably because you made a bunch of bad decisions or whatever. And again, that's what we'll do. And we'll just start really focusing in on ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and I think like there's a bit of a misunderstanding about what the church is, right? So I've been around lots of conversations where people are saying, what can we do to get people to come to church? Like, what can we do it's how to become like more seeker friendly or whatever, and these are from people in church, right? I'm like, but the church is actually, this building where we come and meet. And we actually, as Christians, we are the church. And so, like, I think you're right, what you said earlier, it can be both. It can be like, come to church, see what it's about, see the hope. But if our churches, the places where we go on Sundays, aren't equipping us to go out and be effective disciples, that's really the problem, right? Because not that the church is the problem, but our response to it can be the problem. Like we should be the ones encountering people in our daily lives, showing them the hope of Jesus. And then hopefully they'll come to church with us and become part of that body of believers.
You rarely ever hear me use that terminology, go to church.
Right.
I guess I will just because that's my dog. You don't even hear me use that terminology because it's flawed. I don't even like saying it because the idea of going somewhere and then because what's going to happen, you're going to leave, right? Mm-hmm. I don't like that idea. We are the church, no doubt. If I go to somewhere and sit for an hour or an hour and a half, but when I leave, then I'm like, okay, that's when I'm holy. That's when, we hear holy things and then we leave that. So I don't like that idea at all. In fact, those things are just buildings. It's a building sitting there. It's where people happen to meet. There is a scriptural reference, they met on the first day of the week. But church happens. Church is happening here. Church is happening all over the place. And so as far as being equipped, most of the in fact, think about it like this. How many conversations happen during church?
Right.
None. Generally, we're sitting there, someone is up talking or playing music, and we could sing along, but generally when someone's talking, we're just listening. And so it would be like me telling you guys that I'm a big hunter because I watch it on television, and it's like, have you ever been in the woods? Nope, right. But I watch it every week. I watch that stuff, and so there's a difference in watching something and then being active and actually doing something. And not that there's anything wrong with gathering together. Technically, it would be more, it's called ecclesia, which is a gathering of people, which can be great. But that's, if again, back to your mission, is the mission not try to go to church, and that's just one. It's actually such a small component of what can happen, in our lives. And so most of the conversations I put in the book, it's like a Thursday night, it's a Saturday night, it's, it's in a deer stand, it's in a truck, it's on a trip, it's, it's sitting on an airplane beside someone. This is where the conversation. So this particular book is about where the world meets the believer, which is generally not in church. And what do we say and how do we say it and how can we say something the most effective way? And I would say it's more art. It's not science. So it's not, so you don't have to go say, if I say this, this, and this, the person should respond this way. No, who knows? Like everybody's story is different. Everybody's past is different. To one person, I can say in reference to the church, hey, you can be part of a group of people and they can help you out and you can learn and they'll help with your kids. And one guy will say, that's what I've been looking for. But another person will go like, I would never in a million years show up there. I hate that place. I grew up in a place that was awful. I was hurt by the church, So it's not that, so you're going to have to make an adjustment on how you say that and, what that means to people. So, so it's more an art. It's more like, Paul in the New Testament says, pray for me that the mystery of the gospel can come out of my mouth more clearly. Why is Paul praying that the mystery can come out more clearly? No one knew the gospel better than he did, because he knew. He was telling to people, some people, and they were like, nope, not a chance. So this book is how to go out there and actually be fishers of men, which is actually the only thing that I see Jesus told Peter. He just said, hey, come follow me and we'll go fish for people. And Peter's like, you got it. Now, he said the same thing to a guy we only know as a rich young ruler. Same offer. Right. Come follow me. And that guy said no. And so that guy is 2,000 years later is still known by what kept him from it, which has been rich, been young, been a ruler. And Peter took the challenge. Did Peter screw up? Of course he did. But Jesus said, we're going to go fish for people. So he knew exactly what this whole thing was about. It wasn't to go to church and so that you could be a better person and all. No, it was like, we are going after people just like you, and then there's always going to be people just like you. And there's the next one that's just like, but they're lost, right? Or they don't understand. They need someone to tell them, like, how amazing is it when someone tells you something, you're like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. I learn things every day from I'm like, I never knew that. That's really helpful. That's helpful in my life, or that's helpful with my vehicle, or that's helpful with my children or my dog. It's like, that's how we know, is to tell others.
I am so happy that I get to share Pure Annata with all of you. I am extremely picky, as you have probably heard before if you've listened to this podcast for a while, extremely picky about the products that I use in my home and on my body. I do not want anything fake, fragranced, or filled with phthalates or all sorts of microplastics. It is not good for your body. It will disrupt your hormonal system and potentially cause you a lot of issues. So I'm constantly on the lookout for brands that I feel good about to bring into my home and to share with my family. Pure Annata is one of those. They're a cosmetic company founded by a homeschool mom who wanted something safer for her family. And so she created this line of beauty products, which is amazing. I was previously purchasing all natural makeup at a very high price tag. And I wish I would have found Pure Annata sooner, because they make it affordable to shop healthy for yourself and for your family. Go to pureannata.ca to see the full line of things they offer. So we have some burning questions on our mind for you about like faith and family and how that plays out. But before we kind of shift gears and focus in that direction a bit, I want to talk about one specific section in your book. Kind of starts around page 127. You're talking about, I forget the guy's name, but you guys are going hunting together or something, and he ends up being baptized in a cow pond. So I loved that story. And then just a few pages later, you're talking about a guy that still shows up in your phone when he calls as Charlie, get some towels, which is hilarious.
There's a couple of my great, I'm going to hang on. Jeffrey, can you turn the lights up? It looks like now we just went to a camp. It is pouring rain outside. And I just realized it looks like I'm telling tales by the campfire. The light has gone down.
That's funny.
Nothing. Okay, so the cow pond, that's Jake. Jake was a Bible study. We did, so I went to a Bible study at the guy's house, and Jake says, hey, man, I was trying to go to a bar tonight and, hook up with a girl. And he said, but I came to this Bible. Oh, thank you. There comes the lights. And so I just heard him say that. And so I went to my friend. I said, I think I need to talk to him more about, why he's coming to this Bible study. And he said, yeah, I'll set it up. And so he comes and picks me up, and he says, Willie, when I picked you up, he said, man, you started on go. Like, you started on me. I didn't have a Bible. I was just, talking about his life. And one interesting thing was he said, what really impacted him was I'd just done something, I think it was in the Macy's Day Parade or something. He said, you never even talked about your show or anything you did. You were so focused on my life and where I was. And we talked about his story. And so we pull up to the deer stand. He goes, well, there's some water. Why shouldn't I get baptized? And it's kind of like out of the New Testament. And I said, well, I mean, there's other places. And he goes, no, that'll work. And I'm like, it's 17 degrees or something outside. And it's November. And I'm thinking, I don't think he knows how this works. This is like, we're going to be really cold. And so he goes and gets me a pair of waders and comes back. And man, he shucked down to his underwear and went out. And it was so, there was only just a few inches of water. Most of it was just mud and cow manure. And so I said, all right, man, you asked for it. So I get him about halfway down. I just shoved his face right down in the mud. And when he comes up out of the water, it looked like he had seen the Lord, like which was mostly because I'm sure it was like first stage of hypothermia. and he looked like he just ran across that water.
Oh, wow.
And, it was such a great story. And, what was even more interesting was a few weeks later, he told his brother about it. So his brother ends up getting baptized. And then the last was his dad. And so they brought me in. This one, the one night wondered things. I got one night with this guy. We were like in some condo or something. And so I kind of had to really go a little bit more forceful. So I didn't have a chance to like build a relationship because I was only going to see him for one time, and got right down to it. And I really wasn't sure about this guy. And finally I just prayed and I said, God, he's it. And the last thing I read him was, which is not what I read Jake or his brother, which was Luke 14, that was cost of being a disciple, where Jesus talks about this is what it's going to cost you, and you should sit down and think about before you make this decision. Make sure you thought this out. And read him that, and so we baptized his dad in a bathtub, which is interesting. It's kind of like frying a turkey. Like you got to make sure because there's a body going in there, so it can really overspill water everywhere. And so you got to make sure you measure that thing right if you're going to do a good old baptism, bathtub baptism. So, yeah. And Charlie Get Some Towels was one who came with he showed up to the house and he came with a pastor. So the pastor shows up from California, and this is the guy with him. So I assumed he was on the church staff, right? And so we're sitting up late talking, and the subject of baptism came up. And I just look at him and I just said, what about you? You've been baptized? And Charlie just goes, nope. And I was kind of shocked. So I was like, well, he came with a pastor. And I said, oh, what's your story? And then he starts telling his story. And then he had never had that experience. And so, it was like 1 in the morning. Corey, my wife, went to the bathroom. She came back out and I said, Corey, go get some towels. And she knew what that meant. Like that's kind of a common term around here. She was like, really? And I said, yep. And so we got towels and went down to the pond and baptized Charlie. So he went in my phone as Charlie Get Some Towels.
Yeah. See, when I hear these stories, the two words that come to my mind are urgency. Like there's an urgency to share the gospel, but also joy. Like there's so much joy in that decision that people make and in the actual act of baptism. So my question for you though, with that is, does your family receive criticism at all ever for baptizing people, like in these scenarios, like in a cow pond or just in a bathtub, in a condo, or because what I hear sometimes is criticism around believing that there should be this belief that leads to quick baptism just out of obedience versus like, deciding you want to be baptized, waiting a couple months until the next baptism Sunday at church or something, or being baptized like into a local body of believers. Like, do you ever get any of that like pushback? Because that's something that I hear a lot of.
I guess from certain Christians or groups, but not even anything that I would know of. There's nothing like, oh, boy, they're after me today. The world certainly doesn't say anything. But the example is from the book of Acts. And so if you read the New Testament, it's pretty clear. Believe me, I have really studied it out on, especially for this book, what was said to people What was their response? And if they were baptized, how long did it take for that baptism to take place? It was immediate, even in the most extraordinary circumstances, like the middle of the night, like the jailer in the book of Acts, like the walls fall down. He goes to their house and he explains it to his whole family. And it says at that hour of the night, they were baptized. What's interesting is one of the few, there was a couple of questions. I mentioned the Ethiopian, and nothing else is mentioned. It said he began with that very passage and preached the good news of Jesus. When they came upon some water, the Ethiopian says, look, there's some water. Why shouldn't I be baptized? Now, on that one, I would have probably had some reasons. I would have said, well, go back to Ethiopia, get your family around, explain what you're doing. But he didn't. He just went right there and was baptized and goes to Ethiopia. And I think I pointed out in the book, now Ethiopia, I think, has 60 million Christians. It's considered a Christian nation. Could have started right there with that one person. Peter with Cornelius, again, the question was asked, why shouldn't they get baptized? They did. The only one that waited, interestingly enough, was Paul when he sees Jesus. Remember, he looks up and can see him. He goes blind for 3 days. Then he goes down on Straight Street, and then the scales fall off his eyes. And then it said, then immediately he was baptized. So there was 3-day wait on him, I guess. Celestial spanking, perhaps. Just walking around being blind for 3 days. But every other case, that you see this immediate thing. And so, again, I think when we monkey with that, we come up with different ways. I mean, all I'm trying to do, guys, is connect them to the Word. I'm just trying to connect them to the New Testament. And so they can read for themselves and make their own deductions. If someone says, I want to wait, that's fine, But I think, like when you were telling that scenario, it sounds to me like marriage, just like, well, it'd be better if you just waited and lived with each other, because then you can figure out, what I'm saying? You start listening to this.
Good analogy.
Very good.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, that's a better way. And we found that, no, that's not a better way, And so I just try to do it exactly like they did it then. And I try not to change it or wait for the, next appointed time for baptism. It's, I was in Florida one time and a guy says, man, you talk about that a lot. And I said, well, it's in the New Testament a lot. He goes, well, we can't do it here. It's a logistical nightmare.
Right.
And
that's what I hear.
We were in Florida, and so my assistant at the time said, you're 220 yards from the nearest body of water. So it's not, what I'm saying? But it makes it, they're like, it's messy. It's like, you got to do a thing. But I'm telling you, there's something to it or wouldn't be in there.
Right.
And if you read Romans 6, that's the one I can't get past. The first 4 verses, which is when Paul says, this is what this is. When you die, you're buried, you're raised to a new life. And he says, that's the symbol of baptism. That's what it looks like. And that's what you're portraying. So, I think the more we cheapen it down and cookie cutter it out and make this thing where it's like, I just thought my finger, and we make this commitment so flippantly, I didn't get married like that.
Right.
I didn't buy my house like that. They won't turn my electricity on just by going, yeah, I'm good, and man, there should be, I just feel like the more you make it intentional and thought out, like Luke 14 says, and when you're ready to make that commitment, man, you make that commitment. This is not just some, number counting thing that we go, oh, we had, 47, I mean, there was a church I was at one time. It was like, they would say how many people came to Christ, and it was like 800 people.
Right.
And the next year it was like 800 more, and there was like 900. But at some point I was trying to go, where are all these people? like if you're adding them in at a 800 to 1,000 clip, where are they? And so apparently somebody's raising their hand there because the number stayed the same. You see what I'm saying? Over a few years, it looked the same. It sounded the same. There was no more parking spots. We didn't have to tear that building down and build something bigger. So, so I think there's something to that. But again, you got to tie it back to the New Testament. And that's what I teach people. And if they say, hey, I'm ready to go. If they say, I'm good, whatever. I'm just, but I actually I don't get pushback, and I've, like, even when this book came out, I've been on some of the biggest podcasts, Catholic podcasts. I mean, people that you wouldn't associate with that, and I think there's something in there with the New Testament. Even remember he's talking about Jesus, and he's going, some of them were teaching Jesus over bad motives, over money. And remember Paul says, hey, at least Jesus is getting taught. So just like, and I think at some point we will come together and be like, hey man, we're not going to agree on all these little things or different things, but maybe, if we come together as a body, we can be more effective than everybody just going to their buildings and putting your flag over one little particular belief that you think or whatever. If we can agree on Jesus, we can start there, I guess. I
totally agree. And I really appreciate you talking through that. This has been a really big thing on my mind for probably over a year now. So I've been just kind of asking everyone I can and doing my own study as well. I just want to read like half a paragraph of what you wrote here at the end of talking about Paul and Silas and the jailer. And you wrote, the fact that this was so important to Paul and Silas tells me that it should be important to me too. I know it was important to that jailer and his family. And this is exactly what constantly reminds me that it's important to wade into freezing water in a nasty cow pond or get out my Bible to talk to a new friend, even if it's after midnight, because it's not about me. I just was like, that's so good. It's so good. So I really just appreciate reading that. It's like underlined, starred so much of this book.
Well, in that particular story, the jail falls down. They had been thrown into jail for refusing to talk about Jesus. So the walls fall down. So that they're going to come after them. Like they're going to be looking for them, right? Being like, and so the fact that they took that time, like I would have been like, huge. For real, I gotta go. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like they're going to throw me back in that jail that I felt like I just miraculously, and then also make that point, like I would have misread that. So the walls fall down the jail. I would have turned around and been like,
God released me.
Suckers. Yeah. Look what my God did. Yeah. And I would have just taken off. And, but he stayed, the fact that he stayed, man, that tells me a lot.
Yeah. He knew the mission. It's good. All right, Rita, should we shift gears into some of this family stuff?
I'm ready to shift some gears and ask some family and faith questions maybe. So
family and faith.
Yeah, I think one thing that is interesting about you, maybe to, I don't know, just faith in general, but you guys all have these big old beards. You're manly men. You go hunting. You're in faith, and Christianity sometimes is pushed off to the mother of the household. And it's seen as like, obviously it's not the woman's duty to instill faith in their children. It's both parents, I believe. But faith can be seen as like not a manly thing, like relying on God, not a manly thing. And so I think that you have, I don't know, just when you speak about faith and about God to people, it's coming from a different place, and from someone that may be unlikely. And so I think you have the ability maybe to speak to fathers a little bit and why it would be important for fathers to really be in that role of discipleship with their children.
Yeah, I mean, it should be. It's so interesting. How it seems like it may have gotten pushed over.
I just think culturally it shifted a little bit.
To the mother, right? Because we kind of trust the mom more, and mom's going to make sure the family's taken care of. And I'm probably at some point that was expected to be the man, but maybe it's a push away from, that dominant masculinity that we still see all over the world, right? That's just this like overbearing kind of situation. So, I think, I think a lot of men have really, let me say it like this. A lot of men need to step up, and do the things that they need to do to lead, to study with their family, make sure that they pass down faith and all that. And I think, men have, sometimes not stepped up, not done a good job at that. And so, but I think also men are, there's also an openness to, women leading and things. I think even in the church, it's like that. I think for years, a lot of women were silent, and they didn't say anything. And I think we needed those women, we need those women at home to know. And so I think in any great relationship between a man and a woman, you're going to find that, both have these strengths and both have these things that can happen. So, if I can be a part of leading, helping men be godly men, then that's that's awesome. And I think men living on mission. I think a lot of men are mission oriented. And they, it's like whether it's job, within the workplace or outdoors or whatever that is, and man, you get on this mission and you can really lead. And I think it's lacking for sure. I see a lot of men. I'm just like, we got men sitting around, grown men playing video games and just acting like a child. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing with your life? It's kind of upsetting to me, but I don't know. I would like to see, it doesn't have to be ugly or mean. I just like to see strength, strength, because, God is strong and we are, strong men of God. And I love strong women of God as well. But dadgum, I think a lot of guys are just going, yeah, go ahead and pull that, y'all handle, go do that. And, I'm just going to, even guys like, I'm just going to go fishing, or I like God in my deer stand, and that kind of thing. It's really just a way to shirk and not, be a part of anything and really do what you want to do.
Yeah. No, it's true.
You said a good thing about like men get on a mission. Like I feel like women just like they go all these places at once. Like we're great multitaskers, but you're right. Like when men are on a mission, like they get the one thing done, like they will do that. And so if you can get men driving the faith home in their community, like that's going to make big moves, for God. So
well, I think it can for sure. But I think a lot of men have lost their confidence. So they're not confident. They're not sure. They're not, and they're not sure what to say anymore. And they're just, they're just like melting away, because they're just not confident. When people lose their confidence, man, that's hard to get that back, Mm-hmm. And so, I do think I think there's certainly a vein of that, in the world for sure. That's, maybe done on purpose. I don't know. It's like, it's killing the confidence, I think, of men, and that happens. And then they don't do much of anything other than just kind of, but you see it on television, right? Isn't that the way it's portrayed? I think that's that's one reason Duck Dynasty was different. Normally on a sitcom, dad's the doofus and the kids are, smarting off, and mom's the smart one who's doing that. And so I think guys are like, well, I guess that's what I am. I'm just the doofus who give me a 6-pack of beer and let me watch sports, and that's it. And they almost become what it is that you're seeing on TV. And we just weren't, we're not like that.
Yeah. Well, and God has, he planned us all out, right? And he's put everything in us that we need to glorify him in the way that he's called us to. And no matter what culture is saying. And someone who does that very well is your daughter, Sadie. I hadn't been super familiar with a lot of the stuff that she had done until, I guess, within the last few months. And I started listening to some of her messages and oh my goodness, the girl can preach. And I had messaged Rita a while back and I said, I listen to a lot of different sermons online via podcasts or whatever. And there's a lot of really great speakers that are really engaging and can tell a story and motivate you. But then you look at it later and you're like, but what was the scripture passage we were talking about there? And something that I really noticed when Sadie speaks is that it's true exegesis. She has this scripture passage, and while she's super engaging and has lots of stories to tell, the whole time she is focused on what is God saying about who he is and what he's calling us to. She doesn't lose sight of that. And I think that's obviously something that she's picked up from you and from your dad and from everyone in your family, is just locked in that way. But what is it like for you as a dad to see your kids loving the Lord now that they're grown and having kids of their own and doing big things for God? We're not there yet. My oldest is 12, almost 13. Rita's oldest is 13. And so we're still in it. And I can just only imagine what that is like to watch your kids grow up and just lean into what God has called them to do.
Yeah, I get that a lot. How'd your kids turn out like that? Which in one vein, I'll say they're still turning out, right? So they're in their 20s, so it's still, so we still have to work, we still have to work and teach. And, as they go through this stage, the short answer is it means everything, right? That's if I if I missed that, which wouldn't necessarily be all of my fault or my wife's fault, if my kids end up worldly, they can, it's not necessarily an indictment of what I taught them or showed them or whatever. I mean, that's the choice that we all have, right? We can all make that choice at any point. And, but knowing that, she and the rest and the other kids as well, have loved the Lord, have taken that from us. And, that's just that next generation. And so, frees me up a little bit too, to where I can then even be more proactive for kids that don't have godly parents, for parents that desperately want godly children, for families that neither one of them are godly, and that you can go in and try to, make that difference and get the gospel in there. And so knowing that, that they're on their mission, living their mission, it helps me, because if our kids are screwed up, it's going to affect, if your kids, either one of you guys, if kids get screwed up, I promise you, you're not going to be as productive, in anything in life, right? Because you're going to have to focus in on that, and they can be real problematic. So, I think that means a lot. I think Sadie, for sure, she's been gifted ever since she was really little. She was preaching as a 5-year-old. She was, she had that gift. And so, and then she had to, step out and, be bold and do that same thing. It's the same thing we're trying to, get across in this book, which is open your mouth and get out there. And Sadie's been given these opportunities. She took the opportunity from Duck Dynasty. She did Dance with the Stars, she was 17. So it was like a big move, to do that. And then it was like God just had this platform laid out. And said, hey, you want to keep going? Let's keep going. And so, and I think we've been instrumental, certainly Corey and I. Corey's parents as well, have been super faithful, love the word and study. And so it hadn't just been us. It's been really a collective of all these things which is that's what I would call the church. Now you have the church, helping and teaching and all that. And so, she's done that. And and you start making better decisions, and so you marry, and now their children. Now I see my grandchildren who, the same way, we're going to go after them as well. And so a lot of families, that chain gets broken, and I see that a lot. Even kids that I used to, many years ago, I was a youth minister, and seeing a lot of those kids just go back to the world, just gone, and the whole thing with their parents' faith, and something looked phony to them. Something wasn't right. Something, however that transition was, that we talked about going to church and then maybe perhaps being something different. We've always tried to be as authentic as we can, good or bad. Fridays, Saturdays, Tuesdays. I think when we get into that phoniness is when those kids let go. I got you. I see what you're doing. You're acting like you're that, but you're not really that. So
no. So right at the very beginning of the podcast, when we were talking, and then just now, I kind of had the same thought in both times, which is generational curses and generational blessings. The very first generational curse was when Adam and Eve took the fruit that they shouldn't have taken. And we've all we've been living under that curse ever since, right? And with up to your dad, that curse, that generational curse that was going on in your family was broken. And it was redeemed, right? And it's turned into generational blessing, to see your family and now your kids' families and what their kids' are going to do for the name of Jesus. And when it's lived authentically, like you said, there could be things that come in and break that. And we pray that doesn't happen. But I think that's why it's so important for people to be able to see, yes, locally, just people that we know, families that we live with, but also families like yours that, everyone kind of sees what's going on, to set that example, to be hold on, if you're living in a time of generational blessing, feed into that, because you don't know, if you stop doing that, that's when the curse can find you, right?
Yeah, I think, and then I don't know if it's like this in Canada, but what happens is people are you can see what's important to the parents. Around here, it's baseball and all these other activities. And it's church is important until we have a schedule that comes out and says we got to go to this town and play this sport or whatever it is, or football, whatever, it's these sports, and it's like, and they know, they're like, that's the number one thing. College is the number one thing. I got to make sure they get the scholarship, go to the certain college. Well, don't tell me that Jesus Christ is the most important thing in your life when I really see by your post and how you talk about it, that's really the most important, and how much money you make. And so I think I see so much phoniness, because when it comes to that, you can see the sacrifices that are made, and and so I think that really is. I think a lot of these kids are like, I knew what was most important to my parents, and they would say maybe one thing, but really in actuality, it was really, that's how we kind of lived. And so, when they see the gospel is the most important thing, and the things that are important are not things of this earth, or not things of this world, but they're beyond, because life is so short anyway. But there's no doubt to me why kids are like, nah, they just don't get it, which then they're back in the realm of, I'll be trying to come after them, and trying to convert them, to something, because they're not, perhaps they've seen that. So, I think it can be generational. I think a lot of people maybe perhaps they went to church because that's what that's the way they grew up. But then they, once they're faced with, how am I going to live my life, and how's this going to be? And so, I definitely have seen that. I see it here. I mean, I see it in our own community. It's like once everybody agrees, like, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to play t-ball, then softball, then we're going to do this, then we're going to dance. They have taken all your time. There's no time left for really anything outside of what that is. And it's almost like the whole community agrees, like, that's how we're going to do it. And oftentimes it's for the few kids that are really talented, but they need somebody else to compete against so they can get ready to go play college or whatever. And so, like, your kid ends up being like, your kid's never going to go past, this thing, and you have invested all this time, all this money, and all this, and then the kid gets 18, they're like, now what? That whole, it's like everything that you live for in life, and everything that was even talked about is over now. Now they get dumped into college, and then they may lose their mind and go crazy and be worldly as they can be, and then, which is almost like we expect that, like, even as parents, you're like, well, how they're going to do. And then who knows what they're going to be exposed to. And then we're just, literally rolling the dice going, I hope they figure it out, and we wonder why things go bad. Yeah. But we all hope not just the problems.
That's right. Right. Yes, absolutely. Man. Yeah. Rita, did you have anything else there?
Well, I did have a question, but it kind of was answered within that. So I don't think I need to ask it. I was just going to ask how to raise grateful kids as things progress. Because I had read your dad's book. Actually, I have it right here, so I didn't forget the title, The Theft of America's Soul. And he told his whole story in there. And I think that's where he said something about he was raised in the 1950s, but it felt like the 1850s. And then, so I'm sure your childhood was much different from your dad's. And then your kid's childhood is likely, after your success, is much different than your childhood. And I just feel like as we get more and more and things get easier and easier, it's harder to instill gratitude, or you sacrifice some of those character building hardships. Maybe that's it. And so I guess if you don't feel like you already answered that completely, which maybe you did, how did you instill the gratitude and character building really well with your kids when life is easier for them than it was for you?
Yeah, on some levels that I felt like I failed, because I was always like, oh, I'm going to make it hard for my kids. Like, it was hard on me, but I didn't. Like, I couldn't follow through with what I was like, this is different. I think you teach people how to be grateful when you're grateful, and that they can see gratitude in your life. That's the main way you can teach is by them seeing, wow, they're so grateful for that. They're so grateful to God. They're so grateful for others and what they have. I think that when they see you grateful, that's a start. A couple of practical tips. One of the things we did, when we would go overseas and do certain types of mission, where we would take our children with us. And so I think it was important for them to get out of get out of this area and get out of even America and see how other people live their lives. And I think it made a big impact. And we've heard that back. You know, this is one of those things, guys, where it's like decades of data, right? And you don't know it's your own kid. So it's kind of, again, I'm a business guy. So like, by the time you get the data, did it work? You know, you're like, my kids are like in their 20s saying, these are the things. But I learned that from what they said, man, this is what impacted us when we saw, you know, this, or when we had, you know, some children's home in Dominican that, you know, that way. And it wasn't here's what's amazing. It wasn't the things where you would think like, oh, remember that time I went to Disney where it wasn't that. They wouldn't say, oh, that time was the best. And again, that's where we would be off. It was when we were like slumming it down somewhere like everybody's getting sick and, you know, but it's those times of giving where they can now see the gratitude. And so I think it's important for kids to see that. And it doesn't have to be, you know, something as big as that. It can be, but it can be other things. You know, I think be it with our kids, whether it's in the community or where, you know, wherever you can expose them to not like, you know, something that's different than what they see, especially like you guys, if they're in a certain school and everybody tends to be kind of alike in the school, you know, and what will happen is they'll go all through life thinking, well, that's how everyone is, right? And you're like, no, not even in the same city.
Our kids are homeschooled, so they're around people that are very much like them.
Yeah.
Like same bloodline.
Yeah.
That can be good. So going back, that's where I was raised, where we were at the end of a dead end street, you know, and so we were the ones that would be less fortunate. So there was probably, well, I tell you, when Corey came down to visit, like, and she came down, we were like in junior high, and like for her parents, I'm sure they were like, see, this is how people live, you know, and there still can be good people in Christian, you know, it's probably us, you know,
right.
Me and all my poor brothers.
Oh,
that was good advice.
Really good.
That's good advice.
And then one question, pretty unrelated to everything that we've been talking about, is my son would be very unhappy with me if I let this conversation coming to an end without asking you one hunting question. And he had some like very specific ones that I didn't fully understand. So I'm just going to open it up to you and say, what would you tell an almost 13-year-old boy who just is so passionate about hunting and wants to do it? Obviously, he needs to get in the woods and go do it. But what is something you would tell him to do?
Well, I guess he's going to have a talk with mom and dad at some point and say, look, how can we, maybe there's someone else there that, you know, that can kind of get him out and kind of, I mean, I'm not saying can take him hunting. I'm just saying like, there's a lot of things to be prepared. I think it's like sharing the gospel. Like you can be as prepared as you can. And so if it's whatever it tends to be, if it's archery, you know, start getting in that to start doing some practice and what you can do year round. And then, and then I think getting out there is the main thing. You just got to get out there and learn the hard way and learn, you know, start with whatever that is. And so I guess that's what we did. You know, we would kind of follow the season. So we would, you know, fish and we'd eat fish. I mean, that's how we kind of ate. And so in squirrel season, we would, you know, go after a squirrel and then go after a duck and then go after deer, you know, and so, which by the way, now are good skills to have. You know, I can remember COVID and we had an ice storm here. And like, I'm real fortunate that I do know how to go gather my own food if I need it, you know. Yeah. And so, it's a great skill. But I would think, you know, find some people where the community and just, you know, team up there and see if y'all can, even though y'all schedules may not be the best, but I would do that.
I'll just tell my husband to quit being a teacher. I mean, just to make this hunting.
Well, he can be a teacher. Yeah. Do y'all get time off up there in Canada? Don't you get like
not really? I mean, summer, which there's no hunting season. Good, and then 2 weeks at Christmas, 2 weeks at spring break. So it's pretty. Yeah.
Maybe a weekend?
Like a personal
weekend.
Day.
Yeah, we do some weekends. So anyway.
Saturday?
To the squirrel hunting part though, my boys definitely hunt squirrels. And
good.
I will always remember this day when we had to leave to go to music lessons. They're all in music lessons. And I was like, hurry up guys, we got to eat lunch and we got to get out the door to get to music. And they just shot a squirrel like right before.
Yeah.
And it was the first time my younger son, who was, I guess he was 10 at the time, had shot a squirrel, but at first was wounded. But then he had to like track it down and kill it. And he was just feeling really bad that it was wounded first. And he said the only thing that would make him feel better is if he skinned it and ate it. And so we had like 5 minutes to go, and they skinned that squirrel, and we didn't have time to cook it right then, but they stuck it in the freezer. And I remember messaging Rita and saying to her, I'm like, I sent her a picture of them or something. I'm like, we're that family. We're that family that's like killing a squirrel moments before like getting in the car to go somewhere. And at first it felt really weird, but then I was just like really proud. I'm like, these boys, like they absolutely could take care of someone, and they could take care of themselves if they had to. And I'm like, it's great. It's a great thing to be able to do that, because I wouldn't have wanted to kill the squirrel and skin it. But if I was starving, I know they would take care of me. So.
You would, they would get my favorite story is my mother. I think she was on Wendy Williams' show years ago, and they said, how do you cook squirrel? And my mom said, is it an old squirrel or a young squirrel? They're two different recipes.
That's amazing.
That's great.
So true, I'm sure. Okay, well, we will let you go. We've taken a lot of your time, but please tell everyone about your book, how they can follow you, and the ministry that you do.
Yeah, I mean, you can find the book anywhere. It's on Amazon or wherever you buy books. And you can check that out. And then duckcommander.com, we have the products, and there's willierobertson.com. Yeah, there's you can check out kind of what we got going on with the family, and new stuff we got coming up. Got some exciting stuff. So yeah, it'll be awesome. Always something coming up exciting. And I really enjoyed talking to you guys.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Did you know during the coronavirus years, poison control centers saw a 20% jump in calls related to cleaning products? This is because of the bleach, all-purpose cleaners, antibacterial cleaners that people were using around their homes. And regardless of your fear during that time and your increase in cleaning, a lot of people just in general use these products around their home. And not only are they bad for you to potentially ingest, but they also are absorbing into your skin. Your skin is an organ. This is where Rocasa Organics comes in. They have cleaning products with natural organic ingredients that you can pronounce, that you know what they are, and they are safe for you and your family to use. You can feel comfortable using them. They also have lotions and soaps and just a wide array of products that you can use in your home. I know our house has Rocasa in basically every room now. So go to rocasaorganics.com and use the code BOOMCLAP to save 20% off your first order.
Okay, what a great conversation that was with Willie. I'm just so thankful that he took the time to share his wisdom with us. And he's a humble guy and would probably kind of scoff at me saying that he shared his wisdom with us. But that's what he did. I mean, I feel like the older I get, the more I appreciate just gleaning what I can from any person of faith who is just so faithful. Any person of faith who is so faithful. And yeah, Willie just did that really well. So I'm hoping that you guys feel the same way after listening. I feel like he provided just wisdom and guidance for us and just great conversation. So I hope you all felt encouraged. So thank you as always for listening, for being here with us on this podcast. We have so much fun bringing you these conversations every week. It's a true blessing in our lives. And so many of you reach out to us on Instagram or via email or however you choose to communicate with us, telling us that it's the same for you. And if that's the case and you haven't left us a review yet, please go ahead and leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen. Send an episode to a friend or a family member. That is one super easy and totally free way that you can support this podcast. And that's how the whole podcasting thing works. We need you guys to kind of come alongside us and help share and get us into the ears of new listeners. If you would like to follow Rita and I outside of the podcast, you can find us both on Instagram as well as our podcast. You can find our podcast at BOOMCLAP Podcast on Instagram, or me personally at cecily.dickey, or on my website, thegracetogrow.com.
And you can find me, Rita, at ritarogersco.com or Rita Rogers Co on Instagram. Thanks for listening.